there's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy at Sweetfish Media. I've got with me today Carolyn Crandall, who is Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Deception Officer at Attivo Networks. Carolyn, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me on your podcast here.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm really excited to dig into that title and to talk about some of the things that you guys have been up to at Attivo Networks. And we're really going to dig into establishing yourself as a market leader. But first, I'm really interested. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, your background and what you guys are kind of up to these days at Attivo Networks.
Fantastic. Yep. So I have been in the high-tech industry for around 30 years now, and it has been incredibly fun watching not only technology change, but being at some of the fastest growing tech companies in the industry and really watching and being a participant in how these companies build their brand identity, differentiate themselves in the market, build new markets, and really establish their footprint and their relationships with their customers. And so I've worked for some very big companies like Cisco Systems to some that have merged like Riverbed or Nimble Storage or the current company Attivo Networks. Attivo Networks is a cybersecurity company, a very, very busy space that's out there with thousands of different vendors and solutions being promoted, all trying to solve that very difficult problem of how do you prevent attackers from getting into networks and stealing data or causing other harm. And so this was a really fun opportunity for me because with Attivo, the company takes a different approach. It uses deception technology to cause the attackers to make mistakes by engaging with decoys and deceptions and therefore revealing their presence. It's really interesting because it's never been done in cyber quite this way before. It had been used in for millennia in military warfare, gambling, sports, but not really brought to cybersecurity in a commercial way. So what attracted me was the ability to build a market, build a brand, establish the company as a brand leader, and be able to do some really innovative things that I hadn't been able to do with other companies that didn't have such kind of a personalized brand. Which does lead me to the question of where does this Chief Deception Officer title come from? And is that a scary thing when you put it together with Chief Marketing Officer? And that brings an interesting discussion in itself because as a marketing person, you often get branded as a person that is not technical and is only going to sales pitch your products. And so I was on an interview with Jason from Fox News a couple of years ago at Black Hat, one of the major security tech shows. And after explaining our technology and what we did and the problems we were trying to solve, he's like, "You're like the Chief Deception Officer, right?" And I thought that was a really interesting opportunity to establish a brand that got me out of the branding of being a marketing person, because I also have a very technical background. And a good portion of what I spend my time doing is educating and evangelizing. And so it's stuck. And it has been one tremendous icebreaker because who doesn't want to talk to a chief deception officer, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times I will have an opportunity to speak with people and get on stage and evangelize what we do. So kind of a long introduction about myself and the company, but it's what brings us to here. So again, many thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you fleshed that out because it is a really cool story of how the title came about and how you took it and ran with it, which is a part of what we're about to dig into. So you talked about having a lot of experience in establishing a brand, building a brand, and establishing yourself as a market leader. Teach us your ways. Where do we begin? Give us a brief little overview and of how to establish that identity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it's important as you start thinking about brand, you'll hear things like brand, branding, brand identity. And if you start to break down each of those individual components, you think about brand, it's the emotional connection, it's the relationship, it's the promise that you set forth with your company, your product, maybe even you as an individual to say, what is this organization or thing that I'm trying to build a brand around about, and what kind of a relationship do I want to have, right? And so as you think about that, you then start to go into your brand identity. So in order for you to deliver on that promise, you have to decide, well, how do I position the company? And I'll just use company as an example for now. How do I position the company? How do I tell the world what my promise is? Does my brand have a personality? Am I sincere? Am I fun? Something that may work for a consumer good may not work for a pharmaceutical company, right? People don't want to joke around about, drugs and stuff. So,
right.
So you have to think about the personality or the essence of the company. There's a lot of things even in the voice of how you talk about your company and keeping that consistent, because all of those things collectively together will be used to create uniqueness in a very noisy world. And then the last part of it is the values. What does your company stand for? And if I take a look at what we've done, so Attivo is a company, it means active in Italian, and our promise is having a active or a dynamic cyber defense that is different than the static prevention defenses that most companies use. So here I'm starting to build my promise as a company that says, we're not going to be passive or static. We're going to be active in what we're doing. And our promise is that instead of going and telling people we're like other security tools that prevent an attacker, our promise is now that we're going to be able to detect those attackers that are inside the network and do it in a very efficient and effective way. And so some of the things that we started to incorporate not only into that positioning of who we are was very carefully the words that we choose so that people understand that it's different than other choices they have today. And then we'll layer on some of the more traditional things that people will start to think about, like, well, what is my logo? What does my brand colors look like? What kind of design or font or symbols or taglines do we start to weave in and bring around all these intangibles around what we do? And for example, on the tagline, a lot of times people have to shorthand, well, I only have a logo I can put up, but I want to put a little bit more so that people can identify, because if you've never heard of Attivo, you might go, I don't know who they are. What's their promise to me? Do I care about them? And so we built a tagline of deceive, detect, defend into this. So now people start to go, okay, well, what does that mean? Deceive, maybe they're doing some kind of a threat deception. Detect means they're helping detect better. And defend means that they're able to give me something more than just detecting them. They're helping me now be able to stop that attacker, remove them, and maybe build a predictive defense to keep them from coming back in. And so in three little words, and again, nothing is ever perfect, so you have to build your brand and the identity. But what we were able to do was to take a word that the brand word, which we could build off of, and then we built a promise that we were different, and then we started to build the identity. The colors we chose, orange is our primary color. A lot of trust, a trust and a calming thing with orange, but we also chose a very vibrant color of orange to show kind of innovation with that as well. So that's a little bit around, brand building and how we've applied it at Attivo Networks to stand out amongst that very large crowd.
It's story time again, and we're talking about search engine marketing. Today, I'm going to tell you about a challenge within Pelican Case's B2B division. Pelican needed a partner with deep B2B expertise that could get them a massive bump in leads from their pay-per-click campaigns without increasing spend. After vetting a handful of agencies, they decided to go with Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency located in Southern California. Directive took on this challenge by refining their targeting and building custom landing pages for their advertising efforts. Once implemented, they saw a 208% increase in conversion rate. Needless to say, Pelican Cases met their initiative. And I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
The question that might come up at this point, though, Carolyn, is, so you've painted the picture of how you guys used building a brand, how effective that's been for you guys. But a lot of folks see where that makes sense when it comes to like the B2C world as far as branding. But B2B is only just now, I think, in the last 5 years or so, starting to catch up with really understanding how important that is. And a lot of folks still would ask the question, why does it matter? Why do I care about establishing a brand or establishing, a reputation as a thought leader in B2B, when so often we're talking about these software, choices that come down to, hard ROI, or that come down to relationships otherwise, or just comparing the features and benefits of the solution itself?
Yeah, it's a great question, because now more than ever is your brand identity is going to set you apart from your competitors. And if we think about today's connected world with so much common development, a lot of the systems that technology is built upon today are very common. And so as people look at how do they stand out from all of this competition, they have to find very unique ways in positioning themselves. And so let me take, for example, if, coming from the security world, there's something called a firewall, and a firewall basically puts a perimeter defense so that an attacker cannot get into your network. And firewalls have been around for a long time, and now there's even things like next generation firewalls that are coming out. And it becomes very hard when there's, say, 10 different vendors that are all making that same brand promise, which is, I'm going to keep the bad guys out. And so to be able to have that, to say, well, here's why I'm different, and not just at a feature function, but at an emotional value level as well. Let me try to engage with you and how I solve your problem differently, and I appeal to the different ways you're going to use this product, and I solve it in a more accurate or efficient or simpler way to operate. And I'm looking at how do I build my story of why I'm unique and different, and use that to motivate people to look at my technology, to generate new active buyers, and using it in a way to kind of create that energy around the whole company. And if I'm kind of vanilla and I look like everybody else, it becomes hard. I'll use an example. It's a consumer example, but I was recently out in Sydney Harbor, and we wanted to get some, ice cream or gelato. And it seemed like every 10 feet there was a new gelato stand. And it became very difficult for those companies to have a brand identity. And so what they then had to do and think about, well, what do I have to make myself look different? It could be their storefront, right? And the colors they choose, the messaging, the signage they put up. It could be their choice to hand out flyers to try to entice people in. But in today's world where so many things seem so similar, you've got to think about your brand and your brand identity, and how do you stand out, right? And so, again, B2B, B2C, it really doesn't matter, because we're all under that same pressure. So, you think about it, if you have a really cool logo or a really fun tagline out in front of that store or for your product, you're going to attract people's attention versus just putting up the sign gelato, right? And then you think about, well, what other things could you do around social media or even things that you might do outside of your storefront to bring people in?
What are the components? What are the channels? Once you've come to the understanding, yes, this matters. I have to build brand awareness. I have to establish an identity and make myself known as a market leader. Where do folks begin? What are the channels that you've used to some success?
Yeah. Well, let me talk about some of the real brass tacks basics, and then I'll start to get into more of the advanced strategies behind it. So when you go out, of course, you need a company name, you need a logo. You may or may not choose to have a tagline. Not every company does, but it's a nice thing to be able to help define your business to your audience. You'll go through things of, really simple things like letterhead or business cards or other things. And even when you think about how you apply that brand to those different pieces, and then do you have a catalog? Do you have flyers? Do you have electronic direct mail? Are you using search ads, websites? These are all things that you are extending your brand onto, and thinking about how you maintain that continuity in colors and fonts and words that you choose, especially around anything that may be search related. We found out very early on when we were doing some search things, we thought, oh, we're a deception technology company. And we had the word deception scattered all through our website. And we were thinking, wow, this is really odd. We're not page ranking the way that I thought we should. And it turned out, because deception is very vague and a lot of things will come up, a lot of political things will come up around deception, that you needed to put the words deception and technology together. And when we went back and looked at our website, what we realized is we were using deception everywhere, but we weren't always using the word technology as much. And so putting those two words together, then putting them that way out on the website, allowed us to get our search ranking up and then become back into the first position for that term. And so it's really important as you think about all of these things and then apply them into style guides for your employees or maybe your partners to be able to also use, so that when people see anything around deception technology or they see the words deceive, detect, defend, they think of Attivo Networks when they see those things. So try to apply that to your individual company or business, and what can make you distinct that you can own. And it is tricky in security, because everybody used those key, security protection words. But by putting these three together, we built a brand identity that we could own and we could promote. The other tagline that we use, kind of more of a headline, I'd say, than a tagline when we do our search marketing, is what's lurking in your network. And again, when people start to see that, they start to recognize that as Attivo branding, along with a masked lady that we use for visual effects. And so again, if you can build on to different things for identity that you can own, and sometimes nuances of how you apply the treatments to those things, they may be not unique on their own, but you put the elements together in a certain way that you can then own them as part of your brand. And so it is important to think through those things and then apply them to all of your digital branding, your email communications, how you co-brand with partners, and even how you may present yourself to some of the press and analysts and others that are out there. So if you get to the ultimate of it, you start to go, well, if somebody says, I need to go get a Starbucks, well, they probably want a coffee. Or if they want a Kleenex, they want a tissue, right? So ultimately, how do you come up with, the coming synonymous with whatever that promise or offering is that you have?
Right. No, that makes sense. This has all been really interesting, really valuable stuff. I'm glad I got to pick your brain about these things and see what I can get out of it. But now I'm interested in what you're putting into it. What we strive to do? One of the things we strive to do here at Sweetfish Media is be a free learning hub for the community, for the folks who listen to our podcast and the broader B2B community. And so whenever I have someone on, I'm always interested in what learning resource is informing your approach right now. What's got you excited, whether that's the book you just read, blog post, podcast, whatever it is that's exciting to you these days? What do you got?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I read everything because I like to keep a pulse on what's going on. Right now, the podcast I've been listening to is called Radical Candor, and it's really interesting because you're always trying to be honest and transparent with people, but at the same time, you need to be able to move things forward towards your objectives, and it means a lot of interaction with people, whether they be coworkers or the people that you manage. And this book talks a lot about having very radical candor with people to give them feedback that's motivating and constructive. And so I just think as she takes apart the different elements of that, it gives you some insightful thinking as a manager and how you manage people, how you represent yourself, like a lot of your own personal brand. It's like, well, are you, a good manager, a complicated manager? Are you difficult? Are you easy? And you start to be able to identify a bit with who you are. And if the way that you're acting is not in alignment with the brand that you want to build for yourself, it gives you some ideas on ways that you can improve on those different things. And then, hopefully get better results because, you're more aligned with people and they're more aligned with you. So you're all kind of pulling on the rope in the same direction.
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting you would say that. That book is actually one that is assigned as part of the onboarding when you start at Sweetfish Media. At least it was for me. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It is a great book, and for the reasons that you just mentioned. Carolyn, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today about how to establish yourself as a market leader and why it's important to build a brand. I really did learn a lot. I'd love to have you on sometime in the future again. This has been really great. Thanks so much, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.